want to welcome you guys to our session today. My name is Shannon Kaflish, and I am with Open Sky Group. Along here with me, we have Jeremy Hudson. And looking at the clock, it's flashing already, counting down. We're down to about 36 minutes already, so welcome to the world's fastest presentation. Alongside me here is Jeremy Hudson, who's our VP of Client Services. Smittle Nayak, who's a director. Dennis could not be here. He's at a beard conference, so he's going off and showing off his good looks. But no, Dennis is at a go live with one of our clients. So we're here today to talk to you guys about a couple different things. We did this conversation earlier in the week with a couple of our clients joining us. So it's something that's pretty near and dear to our hearts. As you kind of will hear a little bit more, Jeremy and Smittle will kind of introduce themselves, give a little bit of background. But one of the things we want to talk about is, as you walk around ProMat, I'm sure everybody has seen the robots and the automation and all the different things that, talk to you about how you can improve your processes, improve your operations, all of these things. One of the things they all have in common is I have to spend X to get Y. So as we talk to our clients, one of the things they try to do is how do I get more for less? And one of the big things is your labor. And I think as you listen to kind of Jeremy and Smittle talk today, I think you'll understand one of the things we're going to talk about is we're not here to try to sell you something or have you buy anything. We're here to help you guys try to get the most out of a resource that you're already paying for. And that's the people that work for you today. So as we go through this, we'll kind of dive a little bit more. Got some questions for these guys. The one thing I would tell you is if you guys have questions or you hear something and kind of intrigues you, please don't be afraid to raise your hand. We'll be happy to take questions throughout this. This is, we can make it as interactive as you'd like. But real quickly, I want Jeremy and Smittle, if you guys will introduce yourselves, that would be great.
Yeah, Jeremy Hudson. As Shannon mentioned, I'm a Vice President of Client Services with Open Sky Group. Prior to that, I worked in operations for a large part of my career. I've been working in warehousing since I was 18 years old, and I was privileged enough to be promoted from within several times as I rose in my career. So ultimately, that's what we'll focus a lot on today is internal talent, organically creating talent inside the warehouse, and really excited to talk more about my experience and the experience that I've seen as I've worked in warehousing over the last 15 years.
Smittle, you mind introducing yourself, a little bit of your background as
well?
Yeah,
absolutely. So my name is Smittle Nayak. I'm the Director of Client Services for Open Sky Group. A very similar background as Jeremy. Been in warehousing for over 17 years. I started in school, needed beer money. I was like, hey, who's going to hire me, right? So I got a job at Staples, and they're like, hey, start as a picker. And then went along with inventory as a lead, and then a supervisor, and then went to DHL for 10 years held different roles, an inventory manager, systems manager, operations manager, and wanted to learn as much as I could about the operation, right? So, and then after that, I was at FedEx Supply Chain for about 4.5 years as a general manager. I ran one of their facility, 800,000 square foot facility with a lot of people. And currently, for the past 4 years, I've been a director of client services for Open Sky Group. So here I manage our clients and our execution. We do from design solutions, and overall project management. So again, we're going to talk about what helped me, who helped me during my path to be where I am today, and how you can invest the same thing. Look for the things that you should look for that will help you grow within people that are already there within your companies.
Thank you guys both. I think it's kind of interesting as we go through this. There's a couple of key topics that we want to talk about. Obviously, people is probably the number one thing. I think, all the cool things that are out there. I mean, we obviously have offerings from an Open Sky Group perspective, but truthfully, what it boils down to is your people. How are you getting people? How are you getting them in the door? How are you keeping them? Those people are your most valuable asset. So you're looking at that. You're looking at things like, how do you provide opportunities and identify these individuals? How do you, where do you learn to work with them together to understand where can they make the most difference? And then, how do you, first of all, it starts with making a conscious effort to really source those leaders from within your staff, right? It's really difficult to recruit people. Once you get them on board, well, why don't you do everything we can to keep them? And I think that's probably the biggest thing that we're going to talk about is where that becomes valuable. I think one of the unique things Jeremy and Smittle can both offer some opportunity and viewpoint in is they've both sat on your side of the table as customers. They were in those roles. They've grown up in the warehouse. and now they're on the other side of the world, the fence, working as a consultant, helping our clients as they try to do improvements, as they try to do transformational projects. I think it gives them kind of a unique perspective versus somebody who's never been in the warehouse, never seen what growth can do, never seen what those opportunities can bring and how important they are. I think that provides a very unique perspective. I think my first question for you guys today, and I'll start, Jeremy, I guess, with you, and Smithel can chime in, but from your background as you kind of grew up and went through the processes, on the operational side, talk to us a little bit about how promoting leaders, within that operational piece, what did that look like? How did it help?
Yeah, so I think the concept I really want to cover, just to begin with, to introduce what we're talking about here, is the idea of looking at your forklift operators, your floor level associates, those that are starting at the ground level, and understanding how to identify folks that are adequate leaders. As Shannon mentioned, and I'll refer to many times throughout the conversation today, is we spend a lot of time in different warehouses, right? We've seen all the different approaches of creating supervisors, leads, general managers, operations managers, through recruitment techniques, through different strategies around hiring, et cetera, and there's certainly different approaches out there to be taken. I think it's important to emphasize that the operations I've been in that have the most success are those that are looking for opportunities to train within, right? And so by no means do I want you to walk away today thinking that every forklift operator you have in a warehouse and every pallet jack driver is going to make a great leader. That's by no means what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, and it's a bit of a passion for me, is that we've seen a trend away from hiring from within. We've seen a trend away from promoting from within and looking for leaders internally. We've gotten to a point with third-party logistics and larger warehousing, looking at employees as strictly transactional numbers, right? It's temp agency driven. It's very focused on, get on a lift, do this job, clock in, clock out, done, right? And there's very little interest put into, hey, where do you want your career to go from here? What interests you? Where can you play a larger role? What leadership qualities may you be able to bring to the table, right? Which is exactly what got me where I am. I had leaders that focused on, hey, could you potentially, lead this effort? Could you potentially participate in this group to show more additional qualities? And so, again, I think it's important to emphasize, we presented earlier this week with Crate and Barrel, Encore Wire, and other clients on this topic. Crate and Barrel, in their warehouse here in Romeoville, Illinois, 40% of their leaders are promoted from within, from floor positions. And so that's quite a significant number of folks that they've basically hired in at the ground level and risen up. Encore Wire had an even larger metric. 60% of their leaders are promoted from within. And so these are folks that, again, started at the floor level positions and promoted up. And again, I can't state this emphatically enough. These are the operations that we have seen be most successful in doing things like implementing warehouse management systems and new technologies and changing processes and reducing turnover. The reason we're presenting on this topic is because it's productive, right? They're actually seeing better results due to these practices. And so I think it's important to emphasize that, again, we do think there's significant value here with minimal investment by just focusing on culture and some of the aspects that'll get you to promote those individuals.
Yeah, I think that's, Jeremy, you brought up an interesting point about, 40 to 60% of their people are growing into leadership. I'd say the other thing, and I would guess probably a lot of you, if you want to raise your hand, but, how many of you face the problem of turnover, right? Employee comes in, works for 2 or 3, 6, 9, 10 months, and then all of a sudden they're out the door because they want to go to work somewhere else for 75 cents more an hour, right? I mean, we used to run into that all the time. Customers, we called it kind of the internal Amazon effect, right? Amazon opens a warehouse, they pay somebody $1 more. I'm going to go right down the street and go work there because they're not invested in where they are. Have they seen you've probably seen some lower or some reductions from a turnover standpoint as well, right?
Yeah, I'll take that first, and then I'm sure Smithel can chime in as well. But we've seen significant improvements in their turnover, and there's 2 reasons for that. Number one, their leaders are less prone to leave. Because if you invest in me, if you take the time to train me, if you take the time to respect me enough to create a leader out of me, I am less inclined to leave that company, right? I feel you've invested in me, and I feel that I owe it back to you to stay and make you successful. And so it is a huge endowment to say, listen, this company has invested quite a significant effort in making me who I am, right? They've celebrated my successes. They've respected me enough to see that I can do something more. I am now going to make sure I stay and see this through and make them more successful in return. That still exists, right? That mentality, it's not gone, I promise. And so I think that's one area where we see reduced turnover. But secondly, and probably more importantly, is the people you're hiring into those entry-level positions, if their bosses sympathize with them, if their bosses know what pains they experience, if their bosses are implementing solutions, changes that they themselves support because they themselves have done the job before, it makes a huge change. I mean, that's not specific to warehousing. I'm sure all of you have been in positions before where you get new leaders in the door, they've never done what you've done, and they go, hey, try it this way instead. Okay, thanks, appreciate that, right? But you have no idea why, right? And so it just makes such a difference when my leader comes to me, my boss comes to me and says, hey, listen, we want you to start trying this instead. I think it's really going to work because when I did the job, that really, I would have loved having this, right? Like when you see those obsolete walking around ProMat, right? I mean, just things like that where I can look at one of these new solutions and go, oh, that would never work, right? That'd never work for my operation, right? But I can walk by something else and go, man, that would have made a world of difference if I'd have had that in the warehouse. It's things like that that'll make a big difference to your entry-level employees, and they will be more inclined to stay because my boss sympathizes with me. He knows my stories. He knows my history, right? They're more inclined to kind of speak on my behalf and understand my issues.
Sure. That's Spindle. I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially around the operational benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jeremy had just a lot of great points. So and I'll give you some of my personal experience, my personal examples. When I was a general manager, it's the little thing that matters, right? To them, 98% of the people that work for you, they just want to do a good job and they want to be recognized, so that's their thing. So one of the things that I always used to do when I first come into my office, I check my emails quickly, and then I'll take my managers and my supervisors and we'll take a walk around the building. I will say hi to everybody that walks in there, talk about family, talk about football. It doesn't matter. It's not important what you talk about. It's that the communication that you do with them, that's what's important to them. They feel recognized. Like, hey, a lot of times you'll see, like, when you go walk in a big warehouse, you don't see the general manager. Like the picker, we'll never see the general manager. They come in once a week or once a month. My goal was to see everybody I can every day. The other thing I used to do when they at 3 o'clock when they clocked out, I would go out there by the time clock. I'll say bye. I say, hey, thank you guys, great job, right? So little things that matters. So and in getting them involved and then keeping them in communication, right? So everything that we did, I would have all hands meeting every month, keep them involved in what's going on. Hey, how did we do financially? What's happening? What are we doing, right? So just getting them to know things and understand them, that's all they want to know. It's just, hey, I just want to feel that I'm included, right, in the conversation in this building. So the great example that I wanted to give you is when I started the general manager, I used to work for a company called Genco Logistics. I don't know, some of you may have heard it. And Genco was bought by FedEx Supply Chain. So when the conversion happened, my building, 99% retention. I lost one person of the entire crew that we had. And it was not because they didn't want to be here. Something else happened. So that retention that we kept was almost 100% retention. But a lot of times you will notice that when you change companies, like, I don't know what I'm getting into, I'm going to try to find something else, right? So that's what helps you. That retention is huge. So it helped our client because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whose 3PL is. It's the client that we're pleasing, right? So that's what's important to us. And that's what everybody else does. Like, hey, we're trying to please our client. So having to do those small things will help you with retention tremendously.
I think one thing, Jeremy, you mentioned earlier, and Smittle obviously you touched on a little bit, but as you look across your pool of talent, I think, and this was kind of interesting from earlier in the week when the guys from Crate and Barrel and Clemens and folks were talking, they were talking about how they had different roles throughout their organization. So just because I'm a forklift driver doesn't mean that I'm always going to be a forklift driver or a manager of forklifts or something along those lines. I think it was kind of interesting to understand, and you guys probably have a little bit of this too, right? Your background is operations, but you're both more in a technical kind of, business role now, you're not doing operations today. I mean, you still are somewhat, but how has that kind of operational experience helped you guys as you look at, Smittle, I know you're in a much more technical role today. How does that help you, and how could potentially for the folks out here listening, as they look at their people, maybe do they look at somebody who maybe needs to move into a different type of role within the business?
Yeah. All right. So yeah, absolutely. It's all about identifying the talent, right? It's the way I used to do it. I'll tell you. I just usually just use my example. I'm always eager to learn, so I'm always asking my supervisors when I was a supervisor and manager. Like I would set up regular meetings with my manager. It's like, hey, I want to set up some time. I want to talk about new things. How do I do this thing? How do I do that thing? So first thing is, you got to be able to identify it, right? Identifying the talent will help you. Once you know that they want to learn, that's when you can try to start grooming. Where do they fit the best? Maybe that's not the right role for them. Like, hey, inventory maybe not the right role. Maybe safety is the right role for you. So it just depends on once you identify it, and then you can groom that person to see what their interests are, what motivates them, right? And then that's where you can try to groom in the right place.
Yeah, and Shannon, I think to elaborate on the technical sense, right? Because listen, it's one thing to say I want to promote someone from a forklift operator to a supervisor, right? Because I was picking orders, now I'm managing the picking of those orders, right? But what we're seeing be very successful is scenarios where you can find those unicorns that do have some technical capabilities, right? And I'll describe them as unicorns because they're few and far between, but you'd be surprised how many of those you can harvest out of a warehouse if you look in the right places, right? And finding those that have that skill set is incredibly beneficial. I mean, I work with systems primarily, and having that input, that kind of second check, that ability to validate, okay, if we flip this flag, if we turn this on, if we do this as requested, right, it's going to add an additional validation step to the picking task. Now I'm going to have to pick up my gun again. Now I'm going to have to press enter 3 more times. That's going to add a keystroke. That's going to affect the travel path. Now I'm going to have to put heavier products on the bottom of my pallet, or it may put eggs under a heavier item or something, right? But that kind of intuitiveness to think through those impacts while making a completely technical change. This is something that you're just flipping a flag in a screen or reprioritizing something in a screen, but having that person that can relate that technical change to an actual physical impediment or a physical change, that is incredibly beneficial. That is valuable beyond quantification. It's just so beneficial versus saying, hey, could you flip that flag? Sure. Right? 3 days later, all your pallets look like just awful, right? You really need someone that can think through, okay, if I flip that, that's going to change this for this group of people. You're talking about changes that could potentially, stratify out to thousands of users. So, investing in someone that can have that technical knowledge, and then, Smittle started to talk through what to look for to find those people, in this day and age is actually beneficial. You can look for those folks that do some of the more advanced online gaming, for example. I've seen several people that, you kind of look at their hobbies and you can kind of see it in them, right? They think more from a technical sense. The folks that have the annoying curiosity, right? There's no better way to phrase that. I can't sugarcoat it, right? The ones that are always asking why, they're normally really great at this stuff, right? The ones that do want to see over your shoulder onto the screen. We do a lot of go-live supports, a lot of hypercare supports, things where we're fixing things on the fly, right? Hey, it told me to put this frozen item in the cooler, or hey, it told me to put this ambient item in the refrigerator. Why? Right? The person that actually asks why versus the person that drops the pallet and fixes it, not saying, the person that drops the pallet and leaves, that's fine. That's what we asked them to do, right? But the guy that actually steps off the forklift, or guy or gal that steps off the forklift, comes around and says, why did it do that, right? What's wrong here? This is the 3rd time today I've been asked to go this direction. Why, right? The ones that dig down to that next level, it's really cool to be able to be like, okay, come here. Look, you see this field? This field is getting populated by this, and that's wrong. And so the more times I get this, then that's going to populate that value wrong. That kind of just really simplistic training, right, can serve a really great purpose because that gives them that initiative to kind of learn more about the inner workings. So, look for that level of curiosity. It's very beneficial. And again, those are the folks that will transition really well into more of a technical geared role. You'll hear the term super user a lot in warehousing, or even in ERP systems and other areas, right? Those super users, that's who you want to shoot for. You want to try to find the person that's done the grunt work before to be your super user for a system, just because, again, they have that second level of validation of how does this affect an end user's job.
You kind of jumped a little over my question, Jeremy.
Sorry,
That's where I'm
sorry.
going to go next, which is what we kind of talked about all these cool stories, and it's great to see everybody doing it. And I know Crate and Encore both have some good stories as well, and you guys can find those on our website. But give some real. You kind of gave a couple of examples. What's maybe a couple other things that we can look for as we look at that? Smittle, what was something you looked for? When you were promoting people up through the ranks. I know you were growing your team as well. What are some of those things that everybody can walk out of here and go, oh, hey, I can start looking for a couple of these right now?
Yeah, so one of the things, curiosity, right? If you're curious, that's what you look for. Like, what do you, anything, doesn't matter what your curiosity is. Anybody that's curious, you want to pay a little bit more attention to that. The other thing I paid a lot of attention is, like, on the floor, see who everybody else goes to, right? So you always have one, like, unofficial leader, a spokesman within the warehouse that basically talks for everybody else, right? Like, hey, that person, like, everybody, they have a question, but they're either too afraid or too shy or not. They don't want to ask questions, so they'll talk to somebody else, and that person will, like, hey, let me, all right, I'll go talk to them. So see, those are the couple of the things you look for. Like, who's other people are also already following them, right? Okay, let's look at that person. Let's come on down. What are you doing? What are you interested in? What do you want to do? Right? So some of those things, and then to Jeremy's point, all the just the overlookers, right? You want to make sure, like, whoever's looking down his shoulder, asking questions, the one who asks why, those are the one we want to pay attention to. Like, they don't just accept, hey, go take this pallet and put it over here. Well, okay, I'll put it away. But why are we doing that, right? Why? So the ones of curiosity, why. Anybody, just the unnamed leaders that you already have, look for a couple of those things.
Yeah, and I would say our society shouldn't bypass the suggestion box, right? Like, I know we've all moved on in technology, et cetera, right? But some form of that is always beneficial. I think allowing employees to have that input, and then obviously queuing off of those is beneficial as well, right? Just looking for those that have pertinent suggestions that are beneficial to the operation, right? If I do a job repeatedly, day in, day out, and if there's a better way to do it, there's no harm in giving people a chance to voice that opinion, and then obviously being able to capitalize on that.
Sure. So now that we've kind of talked about what to look for, what's maybe some of the things, how do you do that though, right? What are some of the things, I know you guys talk to customers all the time during projects, implementations, they're always trying to get more out of what they've got, but how do they make this happen?
Yeah, so three things. Boy, our time is really messed up again, guys.
Sorry, I got you.
It's all right. We'll clock it on the phones. I would say there's three areas where I think there's a huge opportunity to give people these opportunities to excel. Number one's going to sound really cliche, but it worked for me, and I know it's worked for others. We had little committees in my organization when I was growing, like a safety committee, right? And I was super excited to join the safety committee. Didn't benefit me much, right, if I'm being entirely honest, but it was my first chance to sit in a conference room outside of the warehouse. Like, it was just my first chance to sit at the table with other people from my organization, provide inputs, just really simple things. Any type of organization, you can give people an opportunity to join like that. It doesn't have to be an executive level organization. It just needs to be safety committees and, inclusion committees, right? Fun committee, whatever, but just a chance to sit at a different table, provide suggestions, be seen, be heard, right, and contribute to improvements. I think that's really beneficial. So that's one of them that I would suggest. The second one I would suggest is micro leadership. So this is a scenario where form small little teams that just need a leader, right? So even if it's a really small initiative of, hey, we need to make sure that we 5S and go through and make sure everything is kind of retaped and everything's labeled correctly. let someone lead that initiative. There's no harm in that, right? Like, give someone an opportunity to say, hey, I really need you to take this on. You get these 3 employees to work with today. Let's try to get that done. I need this aisle cleared out. We need to move everything out of this aisle and move it over there. Here's a list of what we need moved. You're going to get these 2 employees. Go to town. I really want to make sure you get it done. I want you to oversee this, right? Just giving people a small chance for that micro leadership, right? I'm not saying promote them, don't change their title, right? Nothing like that. There's no pay raise associated with that. Just, hey, could you make sure this gets done correctly today? I'd really like to make sure you oversee this. Just that sense of leadership in a very micro way. And then the third area, and this one's kind of self-serving, but when we do come in and do system implementations, if you're implementing something new, if you're looking at a new system, if you're pursuing new systems in your operation, whether it be an ERP, a WMS, a yard management system, I don't really care, right? Give someone a seat at that table. Now, I'm not saying they're going to negotiate contracts. They're not going to redline stuff, right? Give them a seat at that table to offer input. Right? If I'm going to go through screens of what picking is going to look like, if I'm going to go through screens of how orders are going to be entered, whatever, right? Just give them a seat at that table to oversee it, feel engaged, feel included in the process, because that sense of inclusion feels so good. And then, you go home, you feel like you got to contribute to something today. You got a little chance to chime in, that kind of stuff. I think all 3 of those areas are really good opportunities to give that person with that initiative more opportunities to show their value.
Perfect. Spindle?
Sorry, one of the things that I used to do is and to kind of very similar to Jeremy's point, I used to hand out a small, I would pick random 4 people, 5 people from my team. It doesn't matter, from inventory team, either the pickers, loaders, whoever they are, and I would hold a meeting basically once a month. And I would, because a lot of times some people are shy, they don't want to speak in front of everybody. So you do these small group meetings, right? That will let them open up a little bit more to you. And then even after that, if they're still not comfortable, I used to do a whole open door policy, so anybody can come in anytime you want. So giving them the opportunity to come and talk to you is really great. One of the other things we also didn't really talk about here so far is providing them, being the mentor, right? That's been a really huge help for me personally. Everywhere I go or every places I've been, I've had the privilege to have great mentors. So if you can find that person and then connect that person with them, that would be a huge help. So that's the first thing. Everywhere I go, I'm like, hey, would you be my mentor, right? You got to find that opportunity for them to guide them, because I'm not perfect. I still could use a lot of help. I could develop myself as well. But somebody with more experience, somebody with more things they have done, I want to be that person. So, right. So finding that mentorship is tremendous.
Out of curiosity, because I know in talking, I've worked with both of you guys for a long time. Mentors are extremely important. Is what I keep hearing from you guys. Real quickly, in the group, do any of you guys have mentor programs today in place? Do you guys have that today? I see shaking the hands of you.
Yeah, one.
Those are, Jeremy, I know that's something important to you as well. Spittle, thanks for bringing that. But that's really critical. If you don't have them, would that be maybe one of your first suggestions of kicking that off?
Yeah, it's going to sound cliche, right? And I'm aware of that. This isn't groundbreaking. It's just important to remind everybody. Culture and mentorship is incredibly important here, right? It just kept coming up the other day when we presented with our clients, right? And it shines through. You've got to have a culture that nurtures this all the way to the top, right? Because if your boss isn't going to support you investing in your people, then guess what? You're not going to be able to. They're going to be cracking the whip elsewhere, and you're going to have to focus on other initiatives, right? And so culture is so important in this. And then mentorship, it's important to be very deliberate with mentorship. You cannot assume mentors come naturally or organically form, right? I think where I've seen mentorships fail so many times is when it's not deliberate and strictly enforced, right? Like, it needs to be something where you tell someone, I would like you to mentor Smittle. I would like Smittle to achieve this in his career. It needs to be that deliberate. I think if it's implied, if it's something that's assumed, it simply doesn't succeed very often. Yes, there's a few examples where I'm sure it will, but I know where I've felt most comfortable having a mentor and where I felt most comfortable being a mentor is when it has been that deliberate. It simplifies the whole process because it's not the most natural thing to humans to say, hey, I'm going to go randomly ask for help. We don't normally tend to do that, right? Kudos to you if you do, but most humans don't. And so just providing that lifeline and making it so deliberate makes a huge difference to someone that's on the up and rise, right? Like if I'm really trying to climb that ladder and you tell me, hey, that guy over there, he'll help you, he'll give you a leg up on that ladder if you need it, it's going to make it so much easier for me to go to that person and say, hey, could you please help me, right? I'm a little confused about this. The other thing I'll say here, and I'll probably step on another question from you, Shannon, but the other thing I'll say here is these folks need support, right? And I can speak personally on that matter. When I was rising through the ranks and trying to, figure out the politics and everything else, I probably talked too much during a few meetings and said a few things I shouldn't have.
Still do.
100, yeah, I was going to say. You could make the argument I still have that problem.
No.
But there's a certain level of passion that may come along with this, or political kind of infancy, where you don't know exactly when to keep your mouth shut, or you don't know exactly what to wait for, or how to present an idea, right? And it is something where we're naturally rough around the edges, right? And there's benefits to that, and there's also some drawbacks. Like, I'm not sitting up here trashing college education. I think college education offers a lot of great things that, some folks may not have, and you kind of need to fill in those voids, right? So that's another area where mentorship is so key here, is to really nurture that growth. You need to have someone that's kind of, teaching you and training you on a few of those concepts that may not be inherent through rising through this level of ranks, right? So it's very important to give them that level of support as they're kind of navigating that career ladder.
Sure. So one of the things that was on the previous slide, we talked a little bit about some benefits, employee retention, some of those things. I think probably the big thing for this group is going to go, okay, hey, wait a minute, but how does this benefit me from a cost perspective? You said, hey, how can I invest in the people? I'm already spending this money. What are some cost benefits? Obviously, employee retention. We know that's important, and I'm sure everybody here would agree employee retention is probably one of the top things you think about. But what are some other cost benefits? What are some things that you guys think about, or we hear from our clients that are valuable, or you've seen as leaders even?
Yeah, one of the things, at least from my perspective, is when you invest in people, they start giving you the ideas, right? So a lot of great ideas come from people who do the job, right? I mean, I don't do the job. I mean, I talk to them, I understand, I know the history, the personal things, few personal things, but I don't know the job well. I've done it, but it's been a while I've done it. So encouraging, when you have that relationship, they'll be more inclined to give you ideas. Now, any one small idea could change how you do the operation. I mean, that's cost savings that could be from anywhere from $10 a day to could be thousands of dollars that you can save. So to give them the ability to speak, right, and then just be having that openness could flourish in down the road.
And it does, right? We see better processes implemented in warehouses that promote from within, period. They just make more sense, right? If you get folks that don't have the operational chops come into the building, right, they'll listen to every vendor that walks in that door. Oh, you think this will improve my productivity? Sure, I'll put it in, right? And good luck with that, right? It's just we see better solutions from people that have done the jobs previously, period. It's factual. I would say the other thing, Shannon, is we see more dedication. Listen, rental cars, I don't treat them the same as my own car. I'll admit to that. Rental properties, you don't treat them the same as your home, right? Same thing with your work. If you feel like you're invested, if that is your home, if that's your future, right? The more successful my company is, the more successful I will be. I will care more about my customers. I will care more about the quality of the work that goes to them. I will do a better job of picking and packing. I will do a better job of loading. I will do a better job of returns processing because I know it affects the bottom line of my company, which affects how far and how how far I can go in that company. So those are some other, tangible benefits from that as well.
I would imagine everybody here is looking for some type of solution or platform or robot or something to bring back into your operation to help you continue to grow. I want to throw, you guys didn't get to hear this question beforehand, so I want to see how quick you can think on your feet still. You think about it, take your kind of operational side hat off, right? You worked at customers. Now come back over to the other side of the consultant side and go, when we talk to our customers and we go out and we talk about projects or, hey, you're looking at doing this type of project, whether it's transportation or labor, whatever it might be, what benefits do you see our customers get if they've kind of helped grow up? So you think about a Crate and Barrel, they went through a couple different projects. You think about an Encore Wire Clemens, all the things they've done to kind of transform their business over the last, let's call it 24, 36 months is kind of where they've been. What was kind of some of the other benefits that they got because they don't have such a high turnover? They do have people invested in their business. They do have people that care. As they're thinking about projects and, oh my gosh, do I have enough people, et cetera, what were some of the benefits you guys saw as we went through those with our customers together?
Yeah, I think user adoption is always improved. So, one key factor to any system implementation that you'll ever do, period, is going to be user adoption. One scenario where I've seen that play out several times, I led labor management implementations for DHL for a few years in my past, and labor management's a dicey software to implement. It's basically grading a user on how well they're performing in the warehouse, right? It gives you an actual performance score at the user level. And, you'll hear stories in the news about companies that don't implement those systems well. They'll get bashed, right? Go Google labor management after this and read some of those articles, right? And I guarantee you, in those scenarios, supervisors did not clearly understand what was being implemented, and they did not roll it out properly. And that's not necessarily the supervisor's fault, so I don't want you to perceive this as me pointing fingers. But if I can walk up to an employee with a scorecard and say, hey, looks like you're underperforming, right? We need to make sure we improve this. And the employee says, well, how does this thing even work, right? And if a supervisor looks at them and goes, I don't know, man, it's just the number, right? I'm just reading the screen. It tells me you're doing bad, right? That's never going to fly. And users are going to take shortcuts. They'll compromise safety. They'll compromise their own personal well-being instead of doing what's actually required to meet that labor standard, right? And ultimately, it's just ill-perceived throughout the entire organization, and ultimately, it's not going to succeed at all, right? You'll end up pulling that out. Having that ability to coach employees and adopt the system and really adopt the mentality and say, listen, if you're able to consistently work, if you're able to stay busy, if you're able to stay, focused on your work, then you're going to achieve this standard. Now, let me give you a few coaching mechanisms to support that, right? And the best scenarios is where I've had supervisors put the steel-toe shoes back on for a day, go out and do the job for the day against the labor standard, right? And say, okay, I met that standard for the day. I overachieved on the standard, actually. I can do this. This can be met, right? That's how we encourage users to get more of that adoption, right? And again, to do that, it takes that hands-on experience, that in the trenches, right, to make sure that employee adopts that system easily. Same thing with WMS. Labor's the easy example I've had, though, that's where we see this, really take for system implementations and technology.
Smittle, I know you've been through implementations on both sides of the fences, so I'd love to hear any other comments that you might have with that.
Yeah, the one thing that helps me from at least from this side, what my current role is, right? So having done all of that, I feel like I connect well with the people, right? Because when they tell me that, hey, it's a pain in my butt to scan this 4 times, you know what? I agree, right? Because it's, for somebody who's super technical, they don't really understand the process side, they'll say, it's just one click. Yeah, but that one click, if you have to do 500 times a day, it's annoying for that person, right? So I relate to that. So for me, it's the connection that helps me the most. Because when they tell me something like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. When they say, hey, the carrier's not showing up on time, like, oh yeah, I know. When you have to, if they don't show up, yeah, well, guess what? You got to get overtime. You got to do all this. So that connection, at least from my side, is what helps me do my job a little better, because I can connect to see exactly what. Yeah, I know operation. I've been in the operation for 15 years. I understand it. So that helps me, make a better connection. So then it makes them comfortable. So I've been called an operator, even though I'm on more like a system side, but like, oh, you're an operator, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? So that's what I've been referred to. Like every time I go to the warehouse, like, oh, you're an operator, so you're on my side. So they literally consider me on their side versus on the system side because I understand what happens and how it impacts the operation.
I would say one other thing we haven't mentioned yet is training. Training's a huge advantage. There's a story I heard a few years back, and I'll be very brief because we're running out of time, but there's a story I heard a few years back around how they train dolphins at SeaWorld, right? And so they'll bring in one dolphin initially, and they'll go through all the training effort, and it'll take months on end to train this dolphin to do all of this stuff, right? And I'm by no means endorsing SeaWorld, so just bear with me, right? But they'll bring this dolphin in, right? They'll train it to do all of these things, and it's a arduous, long effort to train this dolphin, but then they'll bring the second dolphin in with the first dolphin, and the majority of the training will be done collaboratively, and it takes a fraction of the time, right? And basically the story was dolphins train dolphins a lot better than people train dolphins, right? So by having the dolphins collaborate with one another and show one another what the task is, what the reward is, et cetera, right? It's a much more expedited process. It works the same with warehouse employees, right? Having warehouse employees train warehouse employees, they speak the same language, they understand the same processes. Training is significantly improved by having that experience.
Very good point. And we are getting short on time, so I'm going to skip to my last question. You guys have given us actually quite a few little nuggets of knowledge and good little pieces of information. What's the one thing, Spindle, I'm going to start with you. What's the one thing, walking out of here, what's the one thing you'd want, if they remember nothing else, what's the one thing you want them to remember as they walk out those doors?
Yeah, so first thing is identifying, right? Once you gotta be able to identify the talent that you have. And then just the counterpart there, identifying is just one part of the deal. The flip side of the coin is giving them the opportunity to succeed, right? So you have to identify them and give them the opportunity. So if anything, you go find out who you are, who are those people that could potentially be successful, and then give them the opportunity to be successful, to let them show you, yes, I can do this, right? So identifying and giving the opportunity are the two things for me.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I would say that I'm hoping someone in this room, anybody in this room, may be in a position to be an operational leader, at least someday or even right now, right? And you may be in a position to actually do this. And if there's one takeaway, it's like I said, I've had the privilege of working in a lot of warehouses and interacting with a lot of forklift drivers, et cetera. And it is an absolute shame what temp agencies and third-party logistics and revenue and even some of the larger logistics companies in the world are doing around this concept because they're simply not giving people the opportunity to excel. And I would say that based on my own personal experience, right, I was given an opportunity by wonderful leaders. I wouldn't say that I was qualified for every opportunity I was given, at least on paper, right? And so for them to see something in me and give me that opportunity to excel and give me that opportunity to prove myself, for leaders to, give me the access to the system that I shouldn't have access to and trust me enough to do those things, it changed my life. Like I'm not elaborating here, right? Smiddle and I both could have had completely different futures had we not had incredible leaders that gave us those opportunities and gave us those benefits. And so if I could leave you with one thing, I know it's sappy, right? And I know it's cliche, and I know you're at a ProMat convention and you're going to leave this room and go see a robot do really cool things, right? But if I could leave you with one thing, it's rethink that, right? When you go back to your operations next week, look at the employees a little bit differently and know that you can truly change someone's life by giving them an opportunity to excel. And so, never underestimate what you're capable of as a leader and the opportunities that you can give to individuals.
Great. Thank you both very much. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it. Have a great day.